Hey guys, Jake from 80/20 Media here. Today we're talking about the best performance modifications for GM's 5.3 LS-based Vortec engine. The Vortec engine was produced across a number of generations and was used in a bunch of different vehicles, but produced anywhere from 270 to 290 horsepower and 315 to 335 torque. Looking at a stock 5.3 Vortec, you're probably going to be looking at dyno numbers ranging anywhere from 230 wheel horsepower to about 265 to 270 wheel horsepower, depending on what sort of condition your 5.3 Vortec is in, depending on which variation of it you have as well. The 5.3 Vortec itself is extremely popular to modify. One, it's LS based, and so it's extremely easy to make a lot of power. Two, it's a very simplistic engine. And three, the block and a lot of the other factory components are capable of handling well over 1,000 wheel horsepower. Are capable of handling well over 1,000 wheel horsepower. There have been a number of these engines that have even made it up close to the 1,500 wheel horsepower mark. So when you look at it, it's extremely tuner friendly. It's easy to make a lot of power. It handles forced induction and boost extremely well, which makes for a great recipe for big horsepower builds. Now, with that being said, there are a ton of different routes that you can go with the 5.3 Vortec. We're gonna go ahead and divide this video into two different sections. The first one being your basic bolt-on modifications, and then the second one being some of the things that you should look at that are a little bit more advanced if you're looking to push past the power levels of just your basic bolt-on modifications. First off, jumping into the basic bolt-ons, your first thing that you're gonna wanna look into is tuning. We have a couple different options here, from custom tuning to dyno tuning to basic plug-and-play flash tuners. But all in all, a tuner is going to be the best power gains that you're getting from any bolt-on or plug-and-play device. Outside of power gains, you will get better throttle response, you'll get better gas mileage, and a number of other benefits that will help your engine overall just run a little bit better. With respect to tuning, two popular companies in the space for the 5.3 Vortec are Diablo and Black Bear. So we recommend looking into those two companies when considering tuning for your 5.3 Vortec. Second thing on the list is long tube headers. Outside of a tune, headers are probably going to provide the second best power gains out of any bolt-on modification. Depending on what other mods you're running, you'll probably get anywhere from about 10 to 20 wheel horsepower out of it. It also helps improve exhaust scavenging, it reduces back pressure, and it lowers exhaust gas temperatures. So it's a great modification to help get exhaust gases out of your engine a little bit more quickly and help lower exhaust temperatures, which results in a cooler and a healthier engine. Long tube headers are going to be the best exhaust upgrade, but another popular thing is a catback exhaust system. Generally speaking, you're probably only going to get a couple horsepower out of a catback system. So typically when you're looking at catbacks, it's more so for the sound improvements that you get out of it rather than the performance benefit. That brings us to the last modification in our bolt-on category, which is a cold air intake. A cold air intake really just helps bring more air into the engine bay. The majority of the intakes out there for the 5.3 Vortec really aren't traditional cold air intakes. So the benefit that you're really getting is from the additional airflow that's going to the engine. You're probably looking at around 5 wheel horsepower, maybe 10, depending on the other modifications that you have from an intake system, but nonetheless, certainly something that's worthwhile if you're looking to maximize gains just purely from bolt-on modifications. So that covers it for the bolt-on category. You're probably going to be looking in the range of 285 wheel horsepower to 315 wheel horsepower with those 4 modifications that I listed. Again, that's going to depend on whether you have one of the 270 horsepower engines or the 290, but it's also going to depend on how well your engine's been taken care of and what the current state of it is. If you have a high 200,000 mile engine, you might be dynoing closer to the 265 to 275 wheel horsepower range. just since those older engines don't quite run as well as something that's a little bit newer and better maintained. So if you want to make more than 300 wheel horsepower or 300 and some change, you really have to start looking into more advanced upgrades. Now, we're not going to go into too much depth on these because there are so many different options and so many different combinations that you can look at. Like we mentioned earlier, the 5.3 Vortec can handle well over 1,000 wheel horsepower. However, getting there severely sacrifices drivability and requires a lot of money in upgrades. So if you're just looking to make a pretty good amount of power, but do it on a budget because you're not building a drag car or a race car or a drift truck, then these are some of the things that we would recommend. Once you start to try to go above 500 is when your build is going to get a lot more complicated and a lot more serious and require a lot more money. Starting off with our more advanced upgrades, the first thing is a camshaft upgrade. There are tons of different options out there that range from stage 1 to stage 4 cams, but an upgraded cam is going to be one of the easiest ways to add power to the 5.3 engine. Depending on what type of setup you run, you're looking at anywhere from 25 to in excess of 100 wheel horsepower, depending on how aggressive of a cam you run. But again, there are a lot of considerations here as, the bigger cam you go and the more power you add, you lose a lot more drivability. What cam you choose really depends on what your goals are for your car, whether you want it to still be a street drivable, daily driver type truck or vehicle, or if it's something that you're building more exclusively for the drag strip. The second thing is forced induction, which is really one of the biggest topics for the 5.3 LS-based Vortec. These engines can handle boost extremely well, and so it is so easy to get a turbo kit or get a supercharger kit, slap it on there, and turn the thing up to about 500 wheel horsepower. Considering some of these engines are getting older and these trucks are getting older, there are a lot of people that love going the eBay turbo route where you can get a full turbo kit for $1,500 or $2,000, slap it on there and produce 500 wheel horsepower without any real concerns for reliability with respect to the engine itself. I'm not going to comment on the reliability of eBay turbo kits. So cam upgrades and forced induction are the two things that I would recommend looking into if you're just trying to make a pretty good amount of power. There's tons of resources online that can help you decide what kind of cam you want, what turbo setup you want to run, or what supercharger you want to run. You can get as crazy as anything from a single turbo to a twin turbo setup and so on. So there's tons of different variations, but fortunately there's a lot of great resources out there that can help you make the right selection for you. There's just way too much detail and too many considerations for us to go that deep into those types of setups in a more generic or basic video like this. If you really are trying to push past 500 wheel horsepower, or if you're trying to do it without forced induction, there's a lot of other things that you can look into, like ported heads, intake manifolds, stroker kits. So there's a ton of other options out there that can really elevate the 5.3. But again, that gets a little bit more advanced and a little bit deeper into building out the 5.3 engine compared to just dropping a cam in it and then throwing a turbo kit onto it. All of that stuff are things that you can look into, but probably worthwhile for another more in-depth video talking about how to actually take a 5.3 beyond the 500 wheel horsepower mark. Like I said, tons of resources out there online. If you want to look into some of these more advanced modifications, you can find plenty of people who have tried and true setups out there in a ton of different price ranges that you can go ahead and follow as an easy template that should give you a pretty easy understanding too of how much power you're going to make off of the setup. So that covers it for our video on modifications. Basic bolt-ons are a great place to start. However, you're really not going to be building an extremely high horsepower 5.3 off of those alone. And so if you do want more than just a little bit of a engine pick-me-up, you'll want to look into cam upgrades and forced induction. And then if you want to go a little bit further, start looking into ported heads, intake manifold upgrades, stroker kits, boring out the engine, and so on. I hope you guys appreciated this video. If you liked this content, go ahead and click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for more GM and LS-based engine content.